Chapter 1, How to Think About Negotiation. So our introduction, negotiation is both an art and a science. So there's many different ways to, when it looks to accomplishing negotiations. So we always think about it in slim chances and ways to do it, and not a lot of ways to do it, but there are a lot of ways to do it. One of the things that makes it important for people to understand is you got to understand what negotiation entails. It's not just going here off a gut instinct or knowing a little bit of information. There's actually a process involved in actually conducting legitimate negotiations. And you have precision that comes from clear terminology. So when you think in terms of the precision that comes with the clear terminology, it's learning such as its analytical framework is actually a significant challenge because a negotiation is something that most people have had some experience with. So it does mean something. Imprecise terminology and false beliefs. So you also have imprecise terminology and false beliefs, based upon what people believe and what they think, and come up with some of their own terminologies and stuff that may not necessarily be applicable in the real world when it comes to that. And also too, when it comes to negotiation, we have this thing where we believe historically where I don't want people to know what I'm thinking because I want to have the upper hand. And that's actually false. It's the sharing of information that actually builds trust to prepare you to negotiate in good faith. And so that's actually counterproductive, but that's a false belief that many people have. Negotiation, what is negotiation and why do we negotiate? So when we look at the negotiation, it's a lot of things when you think about what it actually is. Opportunities are more than what we realize. When we go into a negotiation, we think that, give example, if you're negotiating on the price of a car, there's a lot of other opportunities there too. Give you example, warranties, rebates, service, things that you may be able to negotiate on that are also part of that. But if you're only thinking about the price, you overlook these other things. And when it comes to knowledge should not be reserved. Negotiation knowledge should not be reserved for special occasions like career transitions. This is something that when you think about this, you're likely to be in situations where you come up on a daily basis where you're actually able to use negotiation type skills. And one of the things by doing this, it actually helps you hone the skills. Not all situations are negotiated. Not all situations can be negotiated. And here's why, and I give you an example. If you're trying to do a negotiation with the city to dump toxic waste into the river, well, see, that's not a negotiation. It can't be negotiated because it's illegal. It's against the law. So they can't negotiate with you on that. And I know that's a drastic example, but that's just an example of how some negotiations can't be done. So this is where basically it requires somebody to do your homework. Negotiation potential. So when we think about negotiation potential and resolution, we can think of negotiation potential as a degree to which a conflict situation might be able to be resolved through negotiation. So, is there some potential there that we might be able to resolve this thing through that? And if it's not, you have to think about it. Is this a path that I want to go down? Because it may not be. So you have your formal definition of negotiation. And so the formal definition is, and I will read, it is a process of potentially optimistic interaction by two or more parties with some apparent conflicts seek to do better through jointly decided action than they could otherwise. So when you think about it, that is a process, but you got to have two or more people. It's got to be in there. It's got to be something. It's got to be some type of conflict. It's got to be some type of interest. Situation involves multiple people that you have the conflict, and you also have this joint interaction or interdependence. I mean, basically, everybody's got to have some skin in the game. So when we look, what is negotiation? Why do we negotiate? So when we look at this, you can see in this, what is there negotiation potential? So again, if it's something that doesn't have negotiation potential, this is something that you definitely should not be negotiating on. Does one party have control over something another wants? Yes. No negotiation potential. So if you don't, the answer is no. Does the situation require joint action? If it does, yes. And if it doesn't, no. Negotiation potential exists, yes. So this is when you look at it and you ask some basic questions. Is this something that I should be pursuing? I can probably think of nothing worse than somebody doing doing a lot of negotiation on something that it bears no fruit. Do others have control? What is negotiation and why do we negotiate? Do others have control over what you want or need? So when you look at it and say, do others have control over what you want and need? This is when we say this is somewhere you might consider, then we must consider the nature of the interdependence. What is our relationship? What is it they have and what is it that I want to get? Interaction required to accomplish goals. You got to understand. You have to be, at this point, you have to have some type of interaction with folks. So believing that if you go into a situation, believe this is adversarial and I'm not going to talk to these people, you already lost the game. Interdependence can take many different forms, such as social independence. Social interdependence means that people want to be together and you have different types of independence, but that's one of them. And when you think in terms of interdependence constraints that must be manifest in the parties. So when we think of that, no matter what the type of the independence may be or as important it may be, the purpose is that the interdependence implies a constraint that is manifest in other parties in its some type of simplest form sometimes. And reverse is true as well. Does the situation involve the need for joint action? Okay, if it's a situation that requires a need for joint action on your part and somebody else's part, that's a starting point. The cost must be involved for negotiation. So what's the cost? Even if one party has control over another party, negotiating potential does not exist unless something is preventing them from providing it free of cost. So, it's got to be a cost associated with it. What is it I'm trying to get a deal on? What's the cost of it? In the hallmark of negotiation is the apparent conflict. The conflict is the impediment. So it's like I want something and they don't want to give it. So there is the conflict. So here, when we're negotiating, that's what we're negotiating about, is the apparent conflict. Now, the common mistakes we make in negotiation, and this is where it gets pretty interesting, the mental model of a negotiator. So the thought process about the real world. So when you look at mental model, you think in terms of thought process about how we think as individuals. And we all have them. And we all have mental models. Cognitive representations of situations. Everybody's is going to be different. And it helps organize all information in the mind. Cognitive structures allow us to simplify the world. Because one of the things that we don't like, I don't know if it's in our DNA or in our nature, but we don't like complex things, so we like to simplify stuff. And we do it through mental models. The mental model of a negotiator. Every individual has mental models, and models are different for everybody, which I just said. Possibility of negotiation within negotiation. So this is interesting. We said possibility of negotiating within a negotiation. Let's say that you might be negotiating a warranty on a car and a payment plan or a service contract or something along those lines. But within that, you actually get an opportunity to negotiate something. For instance, negotiate something else. For instance, if you negotiate on a car, as I said, with the car payment and stuff, you might find an opportunity to negotiate on something else within that negotiation. But you know what? That's only if you got your eyes open and you're thinking on your feet. If not, you'll be you'll negotiate on a single issue. Common mistakes. So you think you know what good negotiation looks like. Okay, this is a common mistake that most people make. And realistically, if you think about it, most of us has never had a class on it, never really read much about it, but we think we know what it looks like. And therefore, when we go in to do negotiations based upon our limited knowledge and experience, many times we'll come out there feeling good at the end. And when you look at it, and it's like, And if reality was actually, you could check it, you verify, you probably didn't do that well. The folk wisdom is to negotiate is misguided. Unfortunately, you are likely to be using folk wisdom to negotiate when you're misguided, and that's based on things that I've heard and I've learned, I've been told. You think negotiations have many misrepresentations. So when you think about the many mispreconceptions, so when you look at this, you look at the compromise is not good negotiation. So when you think in terms of compromise, it's defined by dividing stuff up. And a lot of times you think in terms of the compromise, it's like, well, I didn't really get what I want. They didn't really get what they want. And so you're talking about a compromise. So if you think about that, that's not really a good negotiation. You walked out of there like, well, they didn't get what they want, but neither did you. So that's not really a good negotiation tactic. Mindset to go into think about. Preserved relationship means success. Sometimes you may go into a situation where people may negotiate with somebody, but their thing is, I'm going to compromise because I want to preserve the relationship. And then you have this thing where you have some people who are hard bargainers and are great negotiations. Not always. That is not always the case. Because, it's like a bull in a china shop. It might not be good at all just because but it can be perceived as being good. And one of the reasons why it may not be good, because someone who's perceived as that, then what they may end up doing is alienate people. Because see, there's a high probability they may have to come back to the bargaining table again. And when they do, realistically, they've put themselves in a position where somebody's going to play hardball with them because of what their previous experience was. Avoiding conflict. This is something that we don't like naturally to do. We don't like conflict. So we try to avoid it. The problem is, preferred strategy to solving a conflict, if you actually operate that way, then that means you're going in with a gun half cocked. It's almost like you're afraid to get your feet wet. You don't want to step into the deep end of the pool. Well, think about this. If that's the case, what type of negotiation are you going to do? And when you look at the conflict is about differences. Conflicts need not to be about fighting or competition, but rather just differences. And if you can realize the nature of those differences and respond accordingly, you can get more. And about seeing negotiations not about a tug of war, but rather just like a puzzle. Reasons for avoiding conflict. When we think of a reason for individual personality, basically how some people are wired. Culture. Some people's cultural background. Depending upon what your culture is, it may not be your conditioning and your training from your culture to be someone who be a good negotiator, because it may be perceived as rude. And the context of the negotiation, it's like, well, how am I going to go about this? When you think about content, it's what you're talking about. Context is the way you go about doing it. So that could be an issue for some people. And to give you an example, because in negotiations, you have to have different contexts based upon what it is you're negotiating for. So some people may have there may be some context that some people may not be willing to do. Failing to plan. This is where, if you ever hear people tell you, and I don't care if they're billionaires or millionaires, anybody tell you, I make my living and I follow my gut. That's usually not true. And bottom line is, there's usually a lot of planning going on. For people who are good negotiators, they plan. They plan before they go in to do their negotiations. It's not something that they wake up and say, okay, I'm going to go to a meeting today and negotiate. No, they plan before they got there. Instinct focuses on non-ideal outcomes. So if you rely on instinct, you're going to end up with non-ideal outcomes and probably subpar. Cannot think flexibly while arguing. If you get in a situation where you argue with people and it's not about negotiation, then this is not a productive way of going about it either. Planning helps anticipate problems. When you plan, you can anticipate what Jack, I've actually had debates with Jack before, and I've had to negotiate with Jack before, and I kind of know what he's like. So I'm planning for that, for those types of things, how he might respond or whatever else. Now, I'm not going to go into what blinders on and saying this is the only way I'm going into it, but that's going to be part of my plan. Is based upon anticipate some of the problems that may be associated with this. For instance, if I ask for this, what would they say? See, that's planning. I'm trying to anticipate what their response will be, and then I'll come back and plan for that. So, succumbing to the fixed pie bias. Using mental shortcuts to simplify thinking. So when we succumb to this, misrepresentation, information, understanding and avoiding heuristics, error in the decision making, zero-sum bias, there are other issues to negotiate. So when we think of this, I'm going to give you examples. Coming to the fixed pie. If you have a pie and it's cut into 8 pieces, that's your fixed pie. So we go into negotiation knowing, well, there's only 8 pieces right there. How many pieces can I get? In reality, if you go in there, you're thinking, well, it's divided into 8 pieces. But what if there's more pie to come after that? What if we can cut those 8 pieces into 4 big pieces? See, that's not sitting with a fixed pie bias. This is like, I'm going in here with knowing that there's still possibilities. Because realistically, if it were me, I would be thinking there could even be a second pie. So I'm negotiating not only for portions of this pie, but possibly for the next one. Assuming that there is conflict. So when we assume that there's conflict, illusory conflict. So this is assuming that there will be a conflict, and you're preparing for that mentally. And choosing something neither side wanted. So lose-lose agreement, which I referred to earlier, that's not a good way of going into it. So going into it, assuming that there's going to be conflict and it's going to be negative and won't work out. And also go into a negotiation and coming out and it's like, give you an example. Let's say that we were negotiating on what we're going to do in the company. We're negotiating on where we're going to do our next conference. We want to do it. I want to do it in Las Vegas, and someone else wants to do it in New York. And we go into the negotiation, and we come out and we tell everybody, well, we're going to go to Atlanta. That was a lose-lose situation. So common mistakes made with negotiation. And here's some examples. This is the fixed pie bias. So you look at a job and you see the fixed pie. Salary is the only issue. Okay, see, now look at non-fixed. Salary, job start, job title, bonus, moving expenses. You see when you get fixed on just the salary, see what all you miss. Here's other examples with the car and the vacation. I won't read through those, but when you're only fixed on one issue, you miss other things that you could possibly be negotiating on. Mistake 5, assuming too much. So when you assume too much, this is bad too. Go in and think it's something that, we can negotiate on. And on a scale of 1 to 10, this is something that realistic we should be able to get an 8 or 9 on. In reality, that's probably only a 5 or 6 due to various reasons. And when you do that, that's damaging to negotiating strategy, because see, now you're assuming too much and it's not realistic. And some people would almost assume that either it's an ego thing or you're uninformed. But it would cause problems from the jump. It causes frustrations and misunderstandings, as you see. Expecting others to become consistent. So when you expect others to become consistent, this means I expect them to be like they were the last time I dealt with them. And remember, you may be dealing with somebody and negotiating with somebody in a different capacity this time. So don't go in there expecting them to be consistent with what they were last time, because it could have been something totally different. Last time we were negotiating over where we wanted to have the conference. This time we may be negotiating on how many people we're trying to lay off from the organization. So that's 2 totally different wheelhouses. And don't expect that person to negotiate the same way. creates problems for gaining buy-in. So when you have situations where you assume too much, and you're asking for things, like I said, and it's unrealistic. Not only does it cause frustrations and stuff, but it creates problems for gaining buy-in. Assuming that it creates problems for people buying in negotiations that involve organizational change. It's hard for people to buy into stuff when they don't believe necessarily you're dealing in good faith, or you're asking for things that's unrealistic. Mistake number 6, being overly self-serving, falling victim to egocentrism. Okay, when you believe in your own hype, basically, I'm so good at negotiation, and when I go in here, I'm going to get everything I want. This is seen in all types of in negotiations. You have people who believe their own hype, and they believe it's about them, and they believe they're better and smarter than everybody else. The problem is, and they ask for too much, tendency to demand more for a payment, endowment effect, relying on memories to set expectations as well. These are the things that, in the past, this is how it's been. But most importantly, it turns people off. And I will tell you this too. In my experience, if people don't like you, they won't negotiate in good faith. And it's not, even if you're actually have a good idea about something, because it's not the message that they're actually resisting now, it's the messenger. Being overly self-serving, overvaluing one's own experiences and information. So when you're overvaluing one's own experiences and information, we overvalue our own experiences and information that we can recall easily. It is called availability bias. So when we enter into negotiation, we draw on what we can remember about similar negotiations in the past. Own bias creating desired reality. So when you have your own bias creating desired reality, this is when you expect the other side not to trust you, and you behave as such as you don't trust them. So realistically, because you behave that way, guess what? They don't trust you. That's what you project. So now you actually created a situation where they don't actually trust you. That's what you call a self-fulfilling prophecy. Being overly self-serving. So seeking information to confirm beliefs. So confirming evidence bias. So when you're seeking information that confirms one's own beliefs, this tendency for people to seek out and pay attention only to the information that confirms what they believe, is selective. And I can tell you, just about every time I've seen this in any capacity, not just in negotiations, that's something that's easily to overcome, because they cherry pick. And one of the things you do is you shut down the learning process and stuff, because I only want to hear and I only want to learn the things that supports what I believe in, or my position, or what I'm trying to get. Using compromising as a crutch. So using compromising as a crutch, and knowing negotiation tactics. So knowing negotiation tactics and stuff is a part of learning. Negotiation involves in learning to use various tools. It becomes important when you want to recall how you want to deal with folks, understanding the different tactics. Because realistically, negotiation is never a canned approach. So you want to know different type of tactics. But a lot of times, I will tell you this, the tactics that when someone's experienced at negotiation, the tactics that they choose to use are not premeditated and not predetermined. You know why? Because it's usually dictated by who they're dealing with. So they don't really know which tactic they're going to use until they get in there and start dealing with someone. And I give you an example. What if you prepared to have a negotiation with Sally, and the day of, and Sally and Mike and the day of, Sally gets sick and Mike shows up. See, this is why you can't put all your eggs in one basket to prepare for that. You're going to prepare to use tactics as you see fit when you get the situation, not prior to. Reasons for common mistakes. Using most comfortable form of influence. So this is when you have a comfortable form of influence, something that you have a tendency. Usually when I see that, that's usually a pattern. It's something that you will fall back on and use because it's comfortable for you. Relying on own past experiences. how well I've done in the past with certain negotiations or whatever else. And functional fixed biases. So when we think about it, that's the inability to adapt to various situations. It's called functional fixed bias. And that's exactly what I was referring to earlier. You have to be a functional. You can't get to the point where you can't adapt during the negotiations, because realistically, the best negotiators are fluid. They can adapt. They can come in with some ideas, but based on how the negotiation goes, they can adjust fire and adapt and change directions during the negotiations they need to. Rely on the same old tactic again and again. Negotiations may be unique or similar and have basic commonalities. Seeing past surface details can be challenging. Negotiation at work, at home, inner knowledge problem. So when we look at this, using the same tactic over and over again. And also negotiations may be unique or similar. So you have basic commonalities in some of them, and you have some of them that will be very different. The thing about the key is how will you be, when you're doing that? And negotiation at home and work, you're talking about how it can be different. For instance, you have a negotiation at work. You can have a negotiation with your boss about getting a specific project underway and actually win that conversation. And your boss agrees to it and says, you know what, that makes a good idea. Let's do this. And go home and have a conversation with your spouse about a vacation that you want to take. And she tells you that she wants to go somewhere else. And you don't negotiate at all. And you end up going to where she wants to go. That was a negotiation too. It was just a negotiation between your spouse, and it was at home. And that was a negotiation that you lost. Compartmentalize knowledge of negotiation. So this is difficulty in transferring details from one situation to another. So when you have situations where you acquire skills and knowledge and stuff, and you can adapt it in one situation negotiation, you got to be able to transfer that to other situations as well. It may not be exactly the same way, but it's like, how can you be a great negotiator on one topic and be horrible on another topic? You know why? Because it was a topic or whatever else that you were into. It wasn't the art of negotiation. Challenge in becoming competent negotiator. And that's a challenge. It is. And that's why a lot of people struggle with it, because it's work. It doesn't come easy for a lot of people. Some people have the natural gift for gab, and it comes easy for them. But it's not just talking. They understand and they strategize and they execute a plan during negotiations. Pervasiveness of inert knowledge problem. So when you see this is to understand and analyze negotiations, you must know how to see past the surface details into the deep structure of any particular negotiation situation is really about. And that's what I was referring to earlier. You have to be able to look past any particular situation and look deep into it and see exactly what it is, is at the root cause. So relying on the same time, overcoming inert problem. Learn by doing rather than by reading. You know how people learn to become good negotiators? It's by doing negotiations. I heard it once. A famous football coach one time said that he never saw a star player learn how to play football sitting on the bench. No, you actually have to be in the game, and actually by becoming good at negotiations, you have to actually do it. Negotiation while shopping, type of influence and relationship with parties. So you negotiate even in everyday life. Like I gave the example of negotiating with your spouse about which vacation spot to take, and using critical comparison approach. So when you think about that, you can compare your approach with other similar situations that you've had. And when you do that, you see the evidence. It shows you where you've been successful and where you have not. And this means that situations and cases should consistently be compared in order to break the compartmentalization of knowledge. So you get the benefit of looking back and seeing, how these things worked when I did this and things didn't work when I did that. That concludes this chapter.